which we had to leave behind. And then this new thing, Christianity, which arose, which kind of was the truth, and completely different. All of that, I don't think is true. You know, everything comes from somewhere. And what I want to suggest to you is there is a continuum in Western culture, Western spirituality, which goes right the way back to Greece and beyond that to Egypt, with stories of a dying and resurrecting Son of God. So let me just tell you very, very quickly some of the things which were in this mythology, this mythology of a pagan god-man in the ancient pagan mysteries, as they were called, or mystery cults. He's the Son of God. He's born of a virgin in a cave or sometimes a stable. He has 12 disciples. He performs miracles. Specifically, he turns water into wine at a wedding. He comes to bring a new religion, a new form of spirituality, which is based on love. He initiates the rites of baptism. He upsets the authorities who put him to death. He dies at Easter, in some versions through crucifixion, in some versions otherwise. And he rises again on the third day. There's a lovely quote which was found on a inscription which reads, if you partake you will achieve immortality if you partake of bread and wine signifying my body and blood. It's not a direct quote, but that's the essence of it. It's in the book. It sounds like Christianity, sounds like that thing we all got told at school, except it's not. It's a Mithraic inscription. Mithras is the Persian version. The oldest is Osiris, who's the Egyptian version. Then we have Dionysus, another big figure who's the key in the Greek mysteries. In Persia it's Mithras, elsewhere Adonis, Serapis, Attis. There's a whole load of names. Now none of these stories are the same as the Jesus story, but they all share what Joseph Campbell calls the same anatomy. They're basically the same thing. And they contain all the elements which will become the Jesus story. And what I want to suggest to you is that what's happened is that this one mythos, this one store of allegorical stories has become transformed and changed over time, and in the hands of Jewish mystics, not living actually in Israel at all, probably living in Alexandria and Egypt, this becomes the story of Joshua, based on the previous myths of Joshua in the Jewish tradition, which in Greek becomes Jesus. And we get these stories all written in Greek for a Greek-speaking audience about Jesus. So this is one strand, one reason why I think we've got one spiritual tradition, not two. That the Jesus story is actually not only a myth, it's a pagan myth. The second strand, I'm not going to dwell on much, but I will. We can have some questions and I'll go anywhere you want me to go. But the second strand is there is no evidence for Jesus the man, which is pretty shocking, but there isn't. There's nothing. There's faith documents. There's a lot of Gospels, of which there's 4 in the New Testament, but there's actually, well, there would have been hundreds. We now have whole collections of different Gospels, and they're all slightly different. Well, some of them are very different. And they're nothing to do with history. So what we've got here is a lot of documents which, if you look at them from distance, are obviously myths. There's no historical evidence at all. The only evidence which people wheel out, which some of you may know, are things like the quotes from the Jewish historian Josephus. Very famous, you'll hear it on the TV all the time, which is astonishing to me, because it has been known to be a fake for nearly 400 years. Which is interesting in itself. Now the reason it's known, there's lots of reasons. One is we know that Josephus was very much against all Messiah figures because he was a Roman lackey, he worked for the Romans. Secondly, we know that Josephus actually said that the prophecy of the Jewish Messiah had been fulfilled because his patron, the Roman emperor, was made the emperor whilst on Jewish soil. Thirdly, and the most obvious, these quotes about Jesus, which are wheeled out today all the time, do not appear in any copies of Josephus until the 3rd century. Before that, they're not there. And they appear in the library, we're told, of a man called Eusebius, who is a bishop who works for Constantine the emperor, who suddenly discovers there's this passage in Josephus in which Josephus talks about Jesus and provides the historical truth, the historical evidence, which we just don't have otherwise. So what is interesting here is twofold. What is interesting is, firstly, clearly in the ancient world as well, there was no evidence because they had to fake it. And secondly, here we are in the 21st century, and it's still being believed, even though scholars have shown, as I said, for 300-400 years, that it's a bad forgery. So, okay, first of all, the Jesus story sounds like a myth, and has got all the elements in it which are actually already there in pagan mythology. Secondly, there's no evidence for the historical Jesus, and the evidence which seems to be there, you push it slightly and it falls over. Clearly fake. Why were they creating fakes? Why is there no evidence? And then thirdly, and this is the one that I think is most important, the existence of Christians called Gnostics. The early church, by the 2nd, 3rd century, is not a united body of saints and martyrs. It's a deeply divided community. And it's divided broadly between two camps. People who Peter and I called literalists, and people who were called Gnostics. What defines the difference between these two is their attitude towards the figure of Jesus. The literalists have begun to treat this myth as literal. For them, it's about a man who really lived. And you have to believe that, and if you believe it, you will go to heaven when you die, and if you don't, you're in trouble. For the Gnostics, their great heresy, a heresy for which they are eventually persecuted out of existence brutally, is that they claim Jesus did not come in the flesh. That's the line they use over again. Jesus doesn't come in the flesh. Because he is, I quote from another particular Gnostic document, he is many-faced Attis. Attis is one of the pagan godmen. That's who he is. He is another face of this perennial figure. Now, to cut a very long and brutal story incredibly short, for a whole host of strange reasons, the Roman Emperor, Constantine, decided to become a Christian. It was his mum. Never underestimate the power of his mum. His mum became a Christian. And they imposed Christianity on the empire, and within a few hundred years we have black-clad monks, very much like the Taliban, enforcing a form of Christianity, literalist Christianity, pulling down temples, pulling down libraries, burning books, and butchering Gnostics, butchering Jews, butchering pagans, and enforcing a spirituality on the Western world. Carl Sagan once said that if that hadn't happened, we would have gone to the moon 1,000 years earlier. Of course, we all know that we didn't go to the moon, but that's a conspiracy theory too far.